So welcome from the Fisher College of Business at The Ohio State University. I understand we have a large number of listeners and viewers today, and we welcome you to this topic, which I can make a safe assumption you're all very interested in. And there's two aspects to this that we're going to talk about over the next hour. One is the GMAT, and clearly how that is an important tool and assessment used by recruiters in looking at candidates for hire. But the other aspect I'm assuming you're interested in is the recruiter aspect. And what we're going to talk about today is a broader view of the qualities, virtues, skills, traits, attributes that recruiters have told us, and they've told really the world that they're interested in relative to an MBA candidate. I hope the weather is well wherever you are today. It is here in Columbus, Ohio, which is the 15th largest city in the United States. Blue skies and balmy 60 degrees. And for those of you who may be interested in the Fisher College of Business, and we hope that's many of you, it is that way every day in Columbus, Ohio. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge and thank our friends at Beat the GMAT for hosting today's webinar. It's been great working with them, and they're a great organization. Let me tell you a little bit about myself and give you some background. We'll get to that slide here in a second. There we go. That's me. That was taken yesterday. Actually, that's not too long ago. And I have been at the Fisher College of Business for 21 years. And here at Fisher, I lead a career management team that serves 600 graduate students across 6 different graduate programs and an undergraduate program of 6,000 students. That represents about 10% of the entire University of Ohio State. One of the things that's important to understand about Fisher is that it is one of 14 colleges at this mega university, and we leverage the resources of the second largest university in the world, and certainly the resources of a top business school within that university. There are 16 full-time equivalent employees who work on my team, all career consultants and professional career counselors. We have 16 graduate and undergraduate student assistants. And I mention that because I think it's important for you to understand not only about Fisher, but I think about the entire spectrum of the top B school world, that we recognize that the critical component of career management in your student experience is important. And we clearly resource that to hopefully exceed your expectations and certainly the expectations of recruiters in our service with our expertise, and a little bit I'll talk about shortly in our results. In addition to my time here, I've been the past president of the International MBA Career Services Council, and I've been a frequent consultant to corporations in their recruiting strategies. In short, I really enjoy my work, and I enjoy working with students, faculty, and recruiters here at Fisher. Let me tell you a little bit about our mission, and this leads into, I think, what's going to become a little bit more specific as we talk about the recruiter scorecard here in a minute, of which GMAT is important, because what we try to do at Fisher is really provide very highly personalized career services. We try to develop you as a student here as being the best prepared job seeker. In fact, our MO is that we want you to be the best job seeker among any MBA candidate in the world, and we're going to push you towards that. And we want to certainly be every employer's favorite place to recruit. We clearly have the facilities, the quality program, the quality curriculum to attract those recruiters, but we want those recruiters to come back. And in order for that to occur, we need to have students and products that are at their best. And there is where our on-campus recruiting program comes in. We have 3 lines of service, and they're outlined at the bottom of this slide. First is our on-campus recruiting program. We have a portfolio of 500 companies, and we conduct over 6,000 interviews for our students with companies annually on campus. Secondly, we have a personal career coaching program, and let me describe what personal means. In our program at the MBA level, we assign you to a coach, and you will be with that coach for the entirety of your 2 years at Fisher. Clearly, you can leverage other coaches, but what we're proud of is that our ratio of student to coach is less than 25 to 1. And you're going to get the attention of a singular coach for the entire time that you're here. These are experienced career coaches, and they are experienced in industry and functional interest, And in so doing, we're able to build personal relationships with each MBA student over the entire time frame that they are here. This really affords us the opportunity to go deep with every student and build a focused and what we consider to be a very powerful job search plan, both at the internship level and clearly into the second year for postgraduate employment job searches. What we do in that personalized approach is we build on individual strengths in career planning and certainly putting a job search process together. In short, not one size fits all, and every student is different, and we try to go very deep in this personal career coaching initiative. Finally, our third line of business is equally important to us, and I know it will be important to you, and that is corporate development and outreach. It's in this area that we're attracting new companies every year to Fisher. Currently, we're proud of the fact that 80 of the Fortune 100 are currently in our portfolio and recruit here. And this is another area where we try to go deep. This week we're experiencing two really exciting happenings here at the Fisher College and are clearly examples of where we do go deep. 3 years ago we developed an exclusive partnership with GE Capital and have built through their support as well as in their partnership a 5-year commitment to have a center for the middle market of the U.S. economy here at the Fisher College of Business. Part of that partnership is an annual summit event, and that summit is taking place today and tomorrow. In fact, this afternoon at 4 o'clock, Jeff Immelt, the CEO of GE, will be teaching in one of our MBA classes. Tomorrow we will have over 1,000 CEOs from middle market firms around the United States and a few internationally who will be here as part of a day-long summit learning more about how they can become more successful as middle market firms in the U.S. economy. The second exciting event that where we went deep in our portfolio this week was with IBM. We established a year ago a partnership with IBM in an area where they are clearly leading the market, and that is in the area of business analytics. You've all heard the colloquialism, big data. It is one of the most accurate colloquialisms that currently exist in the marketplace, because it is big data. And with IBM, we formed a partnership to establish a center of advanced analytics that's only 3 miles from our campus. We're providing consultation with IBM to corporations across the United States in analytics. And just yesterday, we had an opportunity for several of our MBA students to get engaged in a pilot assessment tool that's going to build an analytics database of talent that will be extended across the globe as companies begin to recruit people in that space. So in the corporate development outreach space, we're really excited about the breadth and depth of what we provide. Clearly in our career coaching, we're excited about the personal approach we take. And in terms of on-campus recruiting, I think the volume speaks for itself. But it's really the combination of these things that what we believe when we partner with organizations like Beat the GMAT, what we hope to bring to you today are takeaways that you can look at relative to where you need to calibrate your score on the GMAT, how you can prepare best in terms of scoring on it. But we want to go much, much deeper today along kind of these 3 lines to have you be the best prepared MBA student when you enter a B school. So here's our outline. We're going to talk about the value of GMAT scores to B schools and recruiters. And the reason both of those are important clearly is that they're both ends of what I call the supply chain. It's the entry point, why it's important to us in terms of admission, and it's the exit point, why it's important to recruiters in terms of the output. We're going to introduce to you today what we think is something very novel, something that we have assembled here that we think is unique, and it's based upon some real data that we'll share the source of that with you as we move along. But we call it the recruiting scorecard. And this is where I want you to have the biggest takeaway. You're going to be given a scorecard, and there'll be access to the scorecard at the end through a website we'll provide you, in which you can begin to grade yourself today on where you might be in terms of competencies, skills, and traits, and then where you can begin to develop further as you move closer and closer to the decision to enter an MBA program. And then we're going to talk a little bit about you as an investor and why that's an important distinction we make here at Fisher. And I'll make that distinction as we go throughout this presentation and clearly at the end. So let's talk a little bit about the beginning of this outline, and that is the value of the GMAT score to B schools and to recruiters. And this is a fairly classic model that you'll find in terms of something in the value process map that you will learn as a supply chain student if you came here, or a supply chain student if you went anywhere else. But it's all about inputs, and then it's all about outputs. So let's look at the inputs, and those are at the top. The incoming class profile. Why are these characteristics important to admissions and committees, and why do they care about them? Let's talk a little bit about employability. One of the first questions my team of coaches will ask you when you arrive at Fisher will be, what skills, strengths, experiences do you already possess that can be highlighted right now to a prospective employer? Imagine a T-square, and across the horizontal of that T is the breadth of your current skills. Now take a look at the horizontal or the vertical of that, which will be the depth. And this is where we need to focus. We want to start from this position of strength, and we want to start honing in on the depth and the gaps and how those will be filled. So in terms of an applicant and in terms of somebody who comes into a top business school like Fisher, we're already looking for some breadth. And you're going to find as we show you this scorecard that my guess is you're going to see that you have strengths along many of these variables already. Let's talk about academic input. Again, the second bullet on the top incoming class profile. This is really a combination of things, and it's a combination of GMAT score, it's a combination of GPA, it's a combination of your involvement. Academic aptitude, if you have high academic aptitude, we make another assumption, and that is that if you were able to achieve that up against a high level of involvement, it's as much about time management as anything else, a critical component of what you're going to need to succeed as a student at a top business school, but what you're going to need to succeed in the job market. We look at your professional presence and your professional quality. Are you staying engaged with networking? Have you become a good networker throughout your early career? The admissions process will involve interviews. It will involve often meeting with alumni. And there will not be a day that passes at Fisher where you will not meet a recruiter or an alumnus or an executive or a faculty member or a member of our staff. And so we're looking at your ability to have that interpersonal interaction. It's going to be a critical component of your success as a job seeker and as a student. So we're trying to assess that professional presence. We're looking at your years of work experience. This is self-explanatory perhaps, but it is as much about the quality of that work experience as it is the quantity. And when I mean quality, it's really looking at where have you achieved in your work significant things that we're going to talk about here in a minute in terms of certain traits and skills. We're looking for teamwork and leadership, and this most certainly will be a daily part of your MBA experience. And we're looking at, are you a person who brings momentum into these dimensions based on your prior experience? And again, it's not too late to build on teamwork and leadership now. And clearly, an important part of the profile is the GMAT score. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more, but right now, let's just put that in the position of it's self-explanatory. It's a number, and it's a number that has meaning, and we're going to go a little deeper with that throughout this presentation. So what does that translate into? The bottom of the arrow. This is what builds a school's reputation and a school's prestige, and it's what corporate recruiters care about. If you think about, again, Fisher's portfolio of 80 of the Fortune 100 companies already on our campus, that didn't happen overnight. That happened as a result of a reputation that was built on the inputs that came into the type of program that we built. And recruiters have become very savvy about those selections, and companies have become very specific because recruiting is expensive. Recruiting is a cost-benefit analysis process for many companies. It is not inexpensive. And so they very much have begun to reduce the number of B schools in which they recruit. And in order to make those decisions, they're making them very objectively. They're looking at employability. They're looking at academic aptitude. They're looking at professional presence and quality. They're looking at the average years of work experience. They're looking at teamwork and leadership, and they're looking at GMAT scores. When you consider these factors, the two that are highlighted in red at the bottom are really characteristics that I think are a little bit more tied to GMAT. GMAT clearly is a variable that recruiters have come to understand that B schools are using to actually provide what is called selective admission. There obviously are more applicants than can be admitted. And in that selective admission process, recruiters view that GMAT score as one variable that was used. They also clearly understand that there are high-quality students, and they care about that, obviously, but that is another variable that is not only looked at in the GMAT score, but based upon the fact that you have past leadership, and that past leadership has a high predictability to future leadership, and that you're also gaining some very strong functional knowledge along the way. In short, if any one of these inputs is missing or is weak, the reputational value of the school, the students who are part of that school, and the alumni is reduced. Therefore, the GMAT score is an important part of the brand equity for every stakeholder that's involved: the applicant, the admit, the current student, the alumni, and the recruiters. So another way to look at the GMAT in terms of industry, and this is kind of what I begin to help students and applicants understand as a metric that I call intellectual capital. While intellectual capital and capacity can be further developed when you're in an MBA program, recruiting really begins at the point of entry. The point of entry involves some initial phases of beginning to screen candidates. One of the things you're going to learn about Fisher a little bit in this presentation as we proceed through it, but clearly as you study us, is that we're going to be talking to you much earlier than you actually show up on campus. Should you apply and be admitted, we know that your decision is now sound. We're going to begin working with you at that point, because once you get to B-School, recruiting has already begun, and there's really no time to waste. And so one of the first things before they get to know you, they being the recruiter, that they're going to look at is how can I begin to screen, how can I begin to determine some characteristics that are important to me. And this is where the GMAT score comes into play. Intellectual capital screening can be done via the GMAT score, but it's more frequent in some industries. As you can see on this chart, it's almost always used as a screening device in consulting. Well, why is that? Well, because intellectual capital is the consulting industry's value proposition. And then it's an industry that provides two things most clients possess, but they're unable to leverage, and that's time and objectivity. Consulting is really an intellectual process, and it's an exercise driven by analysis and data. And that's why GMAT score is almost always used as one screening device among many. Where it's frequently used is in other industries: financial services, petroleum and energy, real estate, and consumer goods. And I won't say that these industries are any less interested in the intellectual capital that I mentioned earlier, but there is some frequency here in terms of analysis. Obviously, in financial services, analysis of numbers; in energy and petroleum, analysis of costs; in real estate, an analysis of markets and segments; and clearly in consumer goods, the entire spectrum of the business process. So analysis is important, and therefore GMAT score will be frequently looked at. Where is it rarely considered a screening device? Technology, pharma, healthcare, manufacturing, media and entertainment, and in the nonprofit sector. And again, these industries will not tell you that we don't value intellectual capital, but what they will tell you is we value some other things at a higher level. And they value things such as process skills and project management and abilities and innovation and candidates who have adaptability. So as you look at this chart, recognize that GMAT is there as a score that is used often in certain industries, almost always in one, and very rarely in a few others as a screening device. However, embedded throughout this entire chart is the concept of intellectual capital being a factor. And it's evident in every industry, and it is initially viewed through the lens of the GMAT score. So beyond the kind of initial screen of intellect, and when you've had the opportunity to present a more full profile to prospective employers once you become a student, and then you'll have that opportunity clearly at a school like Fisher, what are the other skills and traits that recruiters value? In other words, what is the scorecard? And arguably one of the best sources in assembling the scorecard is an annual survey of recruiters conducted by the Graduate Management Admissions Council, or GMAT. In their most recent survey, they achieved responses from over 1,500 recruiters representing 900 companies in 51 countries. Each of those respondents was asked to check the 5 most desired traits and skills he or she wants to see in an MBA, and here's what they said. At the end of this presentation, again, we're going to provide you a link to this scorecard. What they said were the most desired skills: communication skills, strategic skills, core business knowledge, the proven ability to perform, and the ability to manage change. What did they say in terms of most desired traits? Initiative, professionalism, integrity, motivation, and ability. Let's see how these are reflected in the GMAT test and the GMAT score from a recruiter's perspective. So under the skills section, there are 3 out of 5, which in many respects are embedded in the GMAT test. Again, it doesn't mean that the GMAT was developed to only assess these areas, but one perspective a recruiter might have in looking at a GMAT score is, I'm looking at an individual based on that score that I can somewhat calibrate their strategic skills, their communication skills, and their proven ability to perform. Now remember that the GMAT test does assess verbal, mathematical, and integrated reasoning. It also assesses analytical writing skills in both quantitative and verbal portions of that test. So in short, you can do the easy math, but if you see 3 out of 5 skills most desired by recruiters, that 60% of those skills are somewhat interpreted as initially evident in the GMAT score. But let's not lose hope. Let's go to the traits. So let's talk about 5 areas where you have a significant opportunity to move the needle now and while an MBA student. This slide represents the traits identified in the GMAT report. None of these, and I'm going to repeat that, none of these are intuitively connected to the GMAT score from the recruiter perspective. So now 60% of the recruiter scorecard that you saw on the previous slide that was most connected to the GMAT score has been reduced to 30%, 3 out of 10. In other words, beyond the screening process, MBA candidates have a chance to enhance, develop, and strengthen 70% of the overall traits and skills that recruiters seek. These traits are going to become your best window of opportunity to continue developing and enhancing to build your brand equity from a recruiting standpoint. So at Fisher, and in our individual career coaching approach, which you heard about earlier with our students, we focus specifically on that 70%. And this was really most evident in recent feedback we received from a McKinsey recruiter regarding one of our MBA candidates. Let's take a look at each one of these traits as it balances up against how that student addressed these traits with that particular recruiter from McKinsey. So according to the recruiter, intellect, again, GMAT, were table stakes to invite candidates for an interview. They looked at GMAT scores, and that became the ticket to get invited into the interview room. While several candidates demonstrated many of the traits on this page and on this slide, the recruiter cited a specific example of one candidate who addressed all of them. When he looked at initiative, the candidate spoke of reading every case study provided on the McKinsey website in advance of the interview. And that candidate ended up presenting the 3 most consistent variables he found to success in each one of those case studies. That clearly shows initiative. In terms of professionalism, the candidate went further. He took that assessment of those case studies and the 3 things that made each one of those cases successful, and he presented that analysis in hard copy format at the end of the interview. And he presented it in what's known as the McKinsey style. In motivation, the candidate used examples of wanting to be part of at least one winning case team while he was a student at Fisher, and he used 2 previous case competitions as benchmarks to finally get on a case competition team in which he was part of a winning team. As far as integrity, a question that the McKinsey recruiter asked every candidate was a simple question on the surface, but a more complex one in terms of the response. And the question was, who in business do you admire? And this candidate's answer was, well, I admire Warren Buffett. And I admire him for many things, not the least of which is for one of his statements. And one Warren Buffett's statement says, when you look to hire someone, you look for three qualities. You look for integrity, intelligence, and energy. And if they don't have the first one, the other two are going to kill you. And so he addressed integrity. And finally, in the area of ability, the candidate went beyond the recommendation stage of the case study, which every candidate did. But this candidate provided another point of view. And he provided a point of view on the impact of the recommendations as they would have an impact on the global business of the company. So it was not part of the case. He went further. And this best demonstrated his ability to speak to the C-suite. So let's look at the entire recruiting scorecard. Strategic skills, communication skills, core business knowledge, proven ability to perform, ability to manage change, initiative, professionalism, integrity, motivation, ability. There's your scorecard. And clearly all skills and traits that are enhanced through an MBA education like a school at Fisher are important in these areas. What I'd like to do is have you begin thinking about this now from your own assessment of where you stand on these skills and traits and give yourself a grade. And I'd like you then to get feedback from others because objectivity is going to be important. And those others can be anybody in what I call your inner circle, co-workers, friends, family, people that you've known for a while and who know you. Use any scale system you want, A, B, C, D, F, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1 star, 2 star, 3 star, 4 star, and on. But most importantly, it's important that you begin to now to look at where you need to strengthen certain traits and skills. So if you decide to use a letter grade evaluation, I can tell you factually from my experience, and you give yourself an A, B, or C, that MBAs who enter with grades in the A, B range of these skills and traits are going to have a definite competitive advantage over others in the MBA pool across the nation and the world. So let's take a look at each one of these one by one, what we, again, call the recruiter scorecard. And let's begin to think about some actions you can take now to enhance each one of these. In the area of strategic skills, this is really about seeking projects that involve strategic thinking. Don't forget, the GMAT score is one indicator of this skill. So getting involved with projects now will help you with the test. But at the end of the day, strategy involves critical thinking. It also involves other measurements that you'll find on the GMAT test. So what are some examples of strategy projects to get involved with if you're not already? New product development, developing more efficient processes, assessing new markets, doing competitive analysis, cost reduction initiatives at your current company, and clearly anywhere and any opportunity you have to use business data, business analytics, business insights to reach a different strategy for your company will be important. Let's talk about communication skills. Find opportunities to present often. If you're on a work team and you're asked to deliver some of the results during a presentation, raise your hand. You want to do that. When your boss asks you to join him or her at a presentation, ask he or she, and they'll be giving that presentation to a group, volunteer to deliver part of that presentation. When the minister at your church asks you to give a reading, say yes. If you're asked to give a toast at a friend's wedding, say yes. In short, find every opportunity to enhance your communication skills. Core business knowledge. I suggest you pick 5 companies and follow those 5 companies religiously. Clearly, they could be companies you're interested in. They could be companies that you just simply like their product or service. But find 5 companies you're going to enjoy reading about and read leading-edge publications about those companies and stay current. Don't go only with the Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg Business Week and Forbes and Fortune. Those are table stakes. Everybody's reading those. But read Fast Company. Read Financial Times for a more global perspective. Read blogs. And most certainly read books. I mean, read more depth about either a company or a business or a person. Currently, I'm reading Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg, and I'm learning a great deal about the valuable role of women in leadership roles and the challenges that are being faced by women to establish trust and influence, but I'm also clearly learning a lot about Facebook. The proven ability to perform, the ability to manage change. This is where I'm encouraging you to begin building examples now that will aid you in your interviews. Many of you are familiar with the popular framework that is used in describing your performance during an interview, and that framework is called STAR, situation, task, action, result. At Fisher, we take an additional step, and we call it START. So it's situation, task, action, result, and takeaway. We work with each individual student in helping them utilize this framework for almost every bullet that will ultimately be on their resume, because every bullet on your resume is fair game for a question. Interviewing is really storytelling, but the stories have to be concise, and they have to crescendo to results that are relevant to the company with whom you're interviewing. The highest levels of interviewing often involve capturing the story at the end in 2 or 3 tangible competencies that are driven home in what we call the takeaway portion of the interview response. For example, if I asked you, give me an example of a time in which you were given a project that had very little direction, and how did you manage that ambiguity? Of course, you would handle that question well with STAR. You would go through the situation, you describe the task, you would fill in what specific actions you took, and you would obviously crescendo to a result. But what we're going to ask you to do is to, again, go further. And we're going to coach you then to sum up with statements how you got to those results and the heart of the question and what your abilities were. For example, you might say, it was through this project that I demonstrated my abilities to see clarity on the expectations for the project. Number 2, to assemble the best resources and people. Number 3, to create a project timeline that was clear and what was to be achieved. And you might say, I actually thrive with ambiguity, as it provides me an opportunity to not only meet expectations, but often to exceed them. At Fisher, we rehearse, we rehearse, we rehearse. And I think our results are clear. This past year, 100% of our recruiters indicated our MBA students drove their responses to clear results, and 97% of our students earned job offers. So begin building those START frameworks now, not just STAR. Let's talk about initiative. Another example of where the START framework will come into play. To begin documenting your specific work contributions today. Take your resume, get a highlight pen, and go through that resume as it exists right now and document specifically actions you took to create an initiative or to complete an initiative on your own behalf or on behalf of the company. This is where the action part, the A, underlined in red on this slide, is really the most critical part of the framework. There's a clear delineation for me in what I call the virtue spectrum. And think about the virtue spectrum as being on the left-hand side, humbleness, and on the right-hand side, arrogance. And you don't want to be on either one of those sides when you're in an interview talking about something you initiated. If you lead every one of your interviewing stories with the words, I feel, then you're being too humble. If you lead with the words, I know, you run the risk of being too arrogant. But you've got to find the in-between, and the in-between is what I call self-confidence. Statements that lead with, I believe, or I am confident, but recognize the word I, the pronoun I. Granted, we live in a team-oriented world. You're going to be put in teams here at Fisher. You're going to be given lots of opportunities to be in team environments. But after you've established the collaborative approach in your story about initiative in the interview and through the situation and task, it's then time to turn to the I statements, what you did in the action portion to drive home the initiative. So for example, you might say, as part of the project and the assignment that I just described to you, I recommended we look at sales data by quarter for 3 of our major competitors over a 3-year period. And I established and assembled in this a matrix by regions of the U.S. to help determine if there were issues within our company of losing sight of our market penetration. And it revealed that we were in several locations. Notice the subtle difference. It was in the action part all about what you did, what I did to show initiative. Professionalism. The example I'll give you here is pretty simple, and it's right in front of you if you're sitting on your computer right now. And that is, you need to audit your digital footprint. Either you restart or you recalibrate. Don't think that it's not looked at by recruiters, because it is. In a recent survey conducted by LinkedIn, they determined that 80% of recruiters indicate they check students' LinkedIn profiles as part of a screening mechanism for their interview. What else are they checking? They're checking Twitter, they're checking Facebook, they're checking Instagram, they're checking Google+, and we could go on and on. But if your digital footprint is something you need to restart or recalibrate, then now's the time to begin working on that. Integrity. This is a question that you can expect. Tell me about a time in which you had to mitigate an ethical dilemma. Think about experiences you've already had. I'm not suggesting you go out and create them, but they're going to come to you. They come to us often and frequently where it's not a question necessarily of our integrity, it's not a question of our values, but maybe it's a time where we have to think, are we doing the right thing? Focus on documenting those times when you helped an individual or a team avoid or mitigate conflict, and you did the right thing, which led to a positive result. Motivation. This is all about finishing strong before entering an MBA program. Do not be on cruise control before you come. At Fisher, we're not going to let you. We have an MBA pre-career core program that will get you ready. We'll work with you on your resume, on your cover letter templates, on your marketing plans, on the recruiter scorecard. We're going to give you and look at your grades. We're going to find out where your gaps are. We're going to get you ready. So don't think that the last 6 to 12 months of your professional and personal life prior to B school are not important. In fact, recruiters are looking most closely at the top third of your resume, and behavioral interviewing is going to be based on what is most recent. And finally, ability, score well on the GMAT. It's as simple as that. So let me end with what I think is important amidst all of this, and that is, why is it so involved in terms of recruiters' perception? Why is it so important to look at intellectual capital through GMAT screens? Why is it important to look at the entire recruiter scorecard? Well, that's because this is a big investment. I don't think I have to remind you that you're getting close to a decision, and that decision is going to be fairly close to a $250,000 investment. It's not necessarily all wrapped up in tuition. It's wrapped up in foregone earnings that you could be making if you chose to continue to work. From our vantage point, therefore, while you are an important consumer, you're not our customer. Procter & Gamble's our customer. McKinsey's our customer. The Ford Motor Company's our customer. General Mills is our customer. You name the company. In a sense, you're our product as an aggregate, but the product is the Fisher College of Business and any B school you go to. Here, you're something even more important. You're our investor, and we become your portfolio managers. What we want to drive you towards is what actions are you going to take every day, minimally once, hopefully twice, to get a return on that investment in your job search. And our encouragement is that you begin now. It's a solid return on that investment if you have multiple actions every day. So in summary, beat the GMAT, but don't ignore the scorecard. And if you want the scorecard in hard copy, here's where you can go get it. Thanks for your time. We're going to look at some of your questions and try to provide some responses. So here's the first question. Can you tell us what some GMAT cutoffs are for different recruiters? Well, let me give it to you in two ways. One is that the GMAT score from a numerical base is kind of psychological. And what I mean by that is if you were going out to buy a car today and that car was $8,000, the salesperson's going to probably list it as $7,999. So 700 would be a score that I think would be a good calibration for you to think about from a recruiter perspective. Does that mean a 699 is not in the game? It does not. Does that mean that a 670 is not in the game? It does not. So think about it from the vantage point of not what we talked about earlier. It's a number that is perceptual, that validates 30% on the initial screen of what's important to a recruiter. What we're going to coach you here at Fisher, and you're clearly going to be coached at other business schools, is that it's beyond that screen. There's many ways to get in that room. It's only one of them. But I would encourage you to think about the GMAT score as on its initial assessment, probably somewhere between 650 and 750 as being the wide range that most companies who look at this very strategically as an invite. So second question, who provides GMAT scores to employers? Well, the school does. And you can provide it as well if you're asked. I mean, it's really something that can be provided from multiple sources, but it's a score that is fair to ask for, and it's a score that you can be expected to be asked for when you look at the industries we talked about earlier. So let's look at some other questions. Here's a question. What do I do if I don't have a lot of experience in the field I want to go into? Well, I know you're all sitting at various levels of your process and deciding on an MBA program, but one of the things I would ask you to do and ask you to consider is to identify people in the field you want to go into and spend time with them. It does not have to be practical work experience you've had in it, but it's a knowledge you're going to gain, an understanding that you might gain of their work. You've probably all done what are known as informational interviews. Try to find somebody in the field that you want to go into and ask if you could spend some time with them. You're going to find a lot of professionals who are very interested in meeting with people who are interested in an MBA degree. Try to find alumni. As I mentioned earlier, you can use LinkedIn as a very reliable source in identifying alumni at schools you're interested in. But more than anything, ask them about their daily work. What are some of the skills and competencies that are important for them to be successful? And you can begin to build on that now in terms of experiences within your own company. And then also, clearly, you don't have to go too far. Find people in the company that you're in who may be in some of those areas as well. So kind of a follow-up question to that is, what's more important, quality of work or quantity of work? I'm going to go right down the middle on this one. They're both important. You know, I think if you think about it earlier in one of the images I presented to you, and that's the T-square, think about it as breadth and depth. We're going to make some assumptions based upon your application to a top school like Fisher that you have some breadth of competencies and skills, quality of work that you already bring. We're going to look at quantity. We're going to look at that depth, that kind of vertical of the T-square. And what do we mean by that is a combination of time spent, so months and years, but where you really went deep in terms of a project that may have lasted over a period of time. You can do your own analysis, and you'll find that, and it's very transparent on most B schools' website. What is the average work experience of an MBA who enters X business school? But the key is the word average. Don't think of that as necessarily something you have to hit below or above. So that combination of quality and quantity, I'd say they're both important, but I would put probably a little bit more emphasis on the quality of the work, but the depth of that work is going to be what we're going to be assessing. So here's a question. Can you tell us where we can find more information or examples of interviews between different recruiters and MBA candidates? Absolutely. You know, what most companies will tell you is that we want everybody who interviews with us, because we've been highly selective to invite them to an interview, to succeed. And so I would go to the company websites. You're going to find a lot of case studies. You might actually find a lot of case interview samples. But you're also going to, in that scenario, look and find what are the traits and qualities they're looking for. My guess is it will match up pretty nicely with the recruiter scorecard I gave you. But if it doesn't, you're going to find a few things in the margins that may be more important in terms of a hard skill or what we call soft skills to that company. And then all you have to simply do is take that hard skill or soft skill. Let's say it's problem solving. And you just need to put something at the beginning and something at the end. And the thing at the beginning is, give me an example of, and the thing at the end is the actual soft skill. So give me an example of a time in which you solved a problem, and then use the START framework. And it's really almost become easy to create interview questions relative to certain recruiters. The other thing you can look at is a good resource is Glassdoor. On Glassdoor, you're going to get a lot of insights from companies that recruit frequently on B schools. You're going to get some feedback from some students. And then once you enter an MBA program, you're going to be interacting with second-year students who've been through interview processes with companies, and they will become good sources as well. So next question, in which category does community service fall? What documents are required to verify this? Is it okay to discuss this in an interview? Absolutely. You know, I would put community service probably in a couple of different categories. One I would put it in would be communication skills. Another category I would put it in would be initiative. I think a third category I would put it in would be motivation. So let's talk about those three for a little bit. You know, one of the things that is becoming very apparent in most successful companies is that there is a philanthropic, social CSR component to most companies that's critical to their business, and they're going to be looking for people who are wanting to be part of that overall mission of a business and a company. And so is it okay to talk about them in an interview? Absolutely. But I would, again, remind you that if everything you talk about in an interview does not somehow fit within these attributes and traits, then it probably is not going to be as impactful as it could be. So if I'm going to be talking about my community service involvement, I want to tie it to something. And as I mentioned earlier, you might tie it to communication skills in terms of while in that community service activity, I had lots of opportunities to communicate with a very diverse population. If you tie it more into initiative, I took the initiative to get involved with that community service organization because it's important to me, and maybe tie it to how that might be important to the company you're interviewing with. It clearly demonstrates motivation, but how does that motivation fit into the overall scorecard? Think about it from the vantage point, I was motivated to get involved with that community service organization because it is, in my mind, an example of a value or a virtue I possess, which I want to bring to your company. I think you understand the connection you want to make. Questions are flying in. This is great. So is getting an equal score on both verbal and the quantitative sections of the GMAT as important as the overall score? Well, I have an admissions person in the room with me from the Fisher College of Business. She's a little bit more expert on this than I am. Her name is Alita Smith. Alita, do you mind taking that one?
Sure. Greetings, everyone. From a recruiting perspective at any top business school, I would say that they're looking for an above average, or at least an average on the verbal section, and definitely above average on the quantitative section. That when totaled fall in that 650 to 750 range that Jeff mentioned with regards to being competitive in the recruiting process. So very similar expectations and desires from both an admissions and a recruiting standpoint. That 650 to 750 range was in response to a question about consulting specifically, which has a higher emphasis. But when you're looking at verbal versus quant, you know, you want to remember that you're obviously competing against all the other applicants coming in the door, and you can see on GMAT's website, you know, where the median scores are falling. You want to do your best to be above average at all times.
So the next question, why should recruiting companies be worried about GMAT score once we've been admitted and we've completed our MBA? So I'm going to go with the first part because they become almost uninterested after you've completed your MBA. It's really more about the admissions process. Well, as I mentioned earlier, one of the characteristics that a recruiter is looking for in the early stages of the recruiting process is intellectual capital. And I kind of described that earlier as being, you know, one's ability in kind of integrated reasoning and analytical abilities, you know, assessing strategic situations using good math and analytical skills, and those are part of the GMAT test. But I'm glad this question was asked because while that's important, and it's an important kind of initial screening characteristic for a recruiter, it is only at that level. You have an opportunity, if you've been admitted to a top business school, to then go deeper with the other traits and skills that we spent a lot of time talking about during this presentation. And it's important only because at the beginning stages, recruiters at maybe 8, 9, 10 different schools are literally looking at hundreds of candidates for maybe 10 or 12 jobs. And so if you've not been invited to an initial interview, you could make the assumption, again, look at that industry chart earlier in terms of it's a little more important in consulting, still important in financial services and other industries, less important in another, as an indication of I've got to now find other ways beyond that GMAT score to get in the interview room. So it's an important part of the admission process, and it's an important part of the recruiting process. But again, that's why they're worried about it. The word worry is a little bit, I think, a little bit too dramatic. I might suggest they're focused on it from the vantage point of being selective. So here's a question. I'm an MBA applicant from India. Can you specifically tell us how the job market is for international candidates? And what extra pointers do you have for students from India? I'd be glad to do that. First of all, one of the things I want to tell you that I'm very proud of, and we're all very proud of here at Fisher, is that our approach to international students falls clearly into what I spoke about earlier, and that is a very personal approach we're going to take with you. One of the first things I would encourage you to think about as you consider both your application as well as clearly your admission and then ultimately entering the B school is that don't think of yourself as an international candidate or as an international student. Change your vernacular. Think about yourself as a global candidate. That begins to differentiate you immediately. The economy amongst the recruiters and the portfolio that recruited our school is a global one. Probably 75 to 80% of the companies who are recruiting at Fisher have a global footprint and not just a U.S. footprint. And so they're going to be interested, and they're going to be interested from the vantage point of what you bring that is unique. You bring a cultural perspective that a U.S. student might not. You bring perhaps a language and an understanding of specific markets that an international student or a U.S. student might not. And so it's all about differentiation. It's all about how can we identify that. The other thing we don't do, and we're going to make sure that in our approach we don't let you fall into this trap, is we're not going to focus on lists. I'm not going to put in front of you a list of companies that have sponsored F1 visa holders for H1B sponsorships in the past. Because if we did that, that would limit your thinking. That would limit what you want to do. It would limit what you are aspiring to do in terms of your work and employment. And because we don't do that, we want to start with what are you passionate about? What industry do you want to work in? What function do you want to perform? What kind of company do you want to be a part of? Because really, in the end, any company can sponsor someone for U.S. employment. And what I mean by that is a process that any company has the opportunity to follow, and there are very few exceptions to that. So I think our approach is unique, and it goes back to what I said at the beginning. It really focuses on you as an individual and you as a person, and then from that we're going to be able to determine what is your best strategy. But the overlay is going to be what differentiates you from another candidate, not just at Fisher, but at any other B school. And in my mind, it's not the fact you're an international student, it's the fact that you are a global candidate. And I think we have time for maybe one more question, maybe two. Do recruiters analyze GMAT score evolution when evaluating an applicant? For example, some take the test multiple times. Alita, help us understand the fact that if a student took the GMAT test more than once, which of those, how's that score calibrated? How are those multiple scores calibrated?
It depends on the business school. Here at Fisher, we look at your highest total test score. If you've taken the test multiple times, we may also look at your highest potential on the breakdown sections, the qualitative, the the verbal, the quantitative, integrative reasoning, etc. But Jeff, I would think that similar to our approach in terms of your best possible performance would be what your hiring recruiters are evaluating. Is that fair?
Absolutely. Yep. I mean, if, again, there's two scores sitting out there, kind of like salary negotiation, right? You go with the high score. All right. Thanks very much. If there's any other things we can do for you or answer for you, you have contact information both at the beginning and end of this presentation. I very much enjoyed spending some time with you. And if there's anything, again, we can offer, don't hesitate to ask. Have a great rest of the day.